Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host and your moderator. I'm also the creator of and publisher of TheChocolateLife.com. I want to welcome everyone today to this episode where the topic is single origin chocolate, what it is, and it is in the form of a response video to a recent video posted by America's Test Kitchen on taste testing single origin chocolates. And I wanted to go through and respond to the claims that they're making and how that they're representing single origin chocolates. Before we dive into today's episode, what I'd like to remind everybody is no matter where you're watching from, in the world, go into the comments, whether it's on LinkedIn or Facebook, the comments there, or the live chat on YouTube. Let me know where in the world you are connecting from. And what I will do is I will get a shout out up on the screen, say hello. And at any point during the hour, if you have a question about whatever it is that I'm saying or whatever it is that's going on, just put it into the comments or the live chat. I'll get the question up on screen and I will respond to it during the course of the hour. And with that, let's get started. So number one, because I want to play audio, I am sharing my screen in a slightly different way, so it will look different from previous episodes. That's me, not you. I just wanted to let you know. Also, the last time I tried something like this, it was a response video to a John Oliver This Week Tonight from HBO, and like halfway through the live stream, YouTube said, this is not kosher. And they cut down at least the YouTube stream part of it. It was still available on Facebook and LinkedIn. But I'm doing this episode in a slightly different way. And so hopefully I'm going to be able to escape the YouTube monitors during the course of the hour. If you're watching on YouTube for any reason and it goes dark partway through, the reason is YouTube has decided what it is that I'm doing is not kosher, even though I think from a fair use perspective, the fact that I am using short clips and that I am responding to them should make it okay. But we are going to find out. So this is the homepage of The Chocolate Life right now. You can go there. Just a quick note, this past Sunday, I had a website crash, and so I was not able to do the monthly AMA member meeting. If you are a Chocolate Life member, you can go to the February 2024 member newsletter, and you can find the URL, and it's going to be this coming Sunday at the regular time, 10 Mountain Standard Time. So we're going to do that. Also, this episode is sponsored by members of The Chocolate Life. If you're not a member of The Chocolate Life, go there, click on this green button. Yours will say join. I'm logged in, so mine says account, yours says join, and you can become a member of The Chocolate Life. There's always a free tier, and I do thank all of the members of The Chocolate Life for their support. And with that, you can see that what I do is I create a post for every single episode of Pod Save Chocolate. It will give an overview of the episode and provide links and resources, and that's what it is that I've done here. So if you go to this page and you scroll down, what you'll do is you'll find a link to the full episode on YouTube, so you can watch the entire episode. I'm not playing it here for obvious reasons. This episode is immediately archived onto YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook the moment we get done at the end of the hour. So what I wanted to do here was to talk about. So here's the link to the full episode on YouTube. What I wanted to do here is, for the longest time, I have been a fan of America's Test Kitchen, and before that, Cooks Illustrated. I go way, way back. I was a subscriber at one point to Cooks Illustrated back, in the early 2000s, and I have always appreciated the science-based approach to what it is that they're doing. And when something shows up on my feed on YouTube, I will often look at it. And they do things on chocolate fairly regular, cocoa powder, chocolate chips, things like that. And so I've watched many of them. And so I was really intrigued when about 10 days ago or so, there was an episode on single origin chocolate. And so I watched it. And over the course of watching it, I'm going to make this a little bigger. What I realized was that, ATK has a has developed a reputation for providing accurate information, as well as in the form of tested recipes that work with, for the most part, easy to find and fairly inexpensive ingredients. And when this episode came up on single origin chocolate, what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about what single origin chocolate bars were, what it meant, and also because I think that there's a lot of not quite accurate information that the people at ATK put together about what single origin means. It's really important to get the details correct. Chocolate is a very complex, it's a very, very complicated topic. It's easy to get details wrong, and details matter. As we talk about why specialty chocolate and single origin chocolates could be an example of a specialty chocolate, why we want people to consume them, then having accurate information is really, really important. So let's start off. Now, I am pretty much entirely 100% sure that the audio from these clips is going to be shared. If you're watching and you do not hear the audio, please go into the comments and let me know, and I'll figure out how to share these properly. That's one of the reasons why the screen looks a little bit differently today, because I'm sharing it with the audio. So this is clip number one. I'm going to name them afterwards, but this is an early introduction to the topic.
The chocolate market has exploded with single origin bars. Their labels are beautiful and really complex, and boy, they're expensive.
Right. So I wanted to start off by saying, boy, are they expensive, by saying what it is that Jack, the host here, has done is he's predisposed the audience to think that all single origin chocolate bars are expensive. And if you go take a look at the brands that are showcased here, there are some very, very expensive brands. But single origin chocolate does not necessarily have to be expensive. You can go into a grocery store and get a single origin bar from Ritter that is relatively inexpensive, significantly less expensive than anything that's on the table here. Lindt makes single origin bars as well. And there are many other industrial chocolate makers that make single origin bars. And so there's a conflation here between single origin and specialty, and we really need to understand that. So I think that many people will think that single will equate, if they watch this and they don't look critically, that a single origin bar has to be an expensive bar. And that, in my experience, that is not necessarily the case. So the second clip.
So I brought 3 of the bars we tasted. We tasted things from 14 different countries. So I brought 3 of the bars.
So when they talk about tasting from 14 different countries, what they're talking about is they tasted chocolate bars with cocoa beans from 16 different producing countries. And that's an extremely wide range of countries. In general, there are 67 countries that are recognized by ICO as producing cocoa. But you'll notice, as if you scroll through here, there are 2 bars here from Amadei. There are 2 bars from Bonat. You can't see it, but there are 2 bars from Pralu, 2 bars from Ninth and Larkin. Looks like a couple of different bars from Dandelion as well. And so we want to go back and be very, very careful and understand what are they saying here.
Bars we tasted things from 14 different countries. So I brought 3 of the bars we tasted. We tasted things from 14 different countries.
Okay. So I think what's important here to recognize as you go through and look at this is that we have producers from the United States, France, and Italy, right? So we have chocolate manufacturers in the United States, France, and Italy. And most of these are relatively small chocolate manufacturers. However, I would argue that Valrhona is an industrial producer, and so is qualitatively different from these other companies. I mean, so just keep that in mind as we move forward into a future clip, because they'll talk about industrial chocolate in an interesting kind of context, and I want to make sure that we're primed to pay attention to it.
These are all fairly high cacao chocolates, extra bittersweet.
Okay, so there is here a functional misunderstanding of the relationship between cocoa content and bitterness. So bitterness in chocolate, right? So they're calling bittersweet here, right? So bitterness in chocolate is a function of the type of cocoa bean that's being used, right? Fermentation and drying, so post-harvest practices that are involved, as well as roast, right? Anybody who is a connoisseur of specialty chocolate will know that I can have a high cocoa content chocolate, right? And the chocolate not necessarily being bitter. And it's really important. Now, technically speaking, as far as in the US, the Code of Federal Regulations, Section 21.163, which covers cacao products, dark chocolate fits into a category that is called sweet chocolate, as opposed to milk chocolate. There is no category for dark chocolate. It all fits in the category of sweet chocolate, and that legally there's no distinction between semi-sweet and bittersweet. And so Jack here is using language very, very casually and is equating high cocoa content with bitterness, which is, we all know, is not necessarily the case. So let's go back and finish.
65% all the way up to 77% cacao. So these are all fairly high cacao chocolates, extra bittersweet.
So extra bittersweet. Number one, there is no category of extra bitter, right? Or extra bittersweet. It's either sweet chocolate or semi-sweet and bittersweet. And again, cacao content is not directly related to the sensation of bitterness in a chocolate. I've had 80% chocolates made from criollo beans, which are incredibly not very bitter and not very astringent. So what's happening here in these three introductory clips is, number one, is we're setting things up for being expensive. So single origin bars are expensive, and that single origin bars are bitter, right? And which is unfortunate, because I think the large part of the chocolate eating community that's not already disposed towards chocolates with no milk in them, chocolate with less sugar in it, is going to be, I think at this point, turned off by this representation that single origin chocolates are high cocoa content and therefore are bitter. I mean, there are single origin milk chocolates, as we all know. So it is interesting that what the scriptwriters and Jack have decided to focus on when they talk about the characteristics of single origin chocolate to this point.
And what a single origin chocolate means, it comes from a single producer.
Okay. So this is a fundamental misunderstanding. A single origin chocolate comes from a single producer without actually describing what a producer means. And so, okay, so let's actually tackle that right away. What is a single origin chocolate? A single origin chocolate is any chocolate where the origin country of the cocoa beans is listed on the label, right? That's it. A single origin chocolate, that's the colloquial definition. Now, it does not have to be a single producer. If I have a single origin bar using cocoa beans from Venezuela, I could be using cocoa beans that are harvested anywhere in Venezuela, and I could be using a blend of beans from Venezuela or Ecuador or Peru or any place. It does, so the origin could be a producing country, not necessarily an individual producer. Now, I could have a chocolate bar, a single origin chocolate bar, where it says that the origin is Chihuahua. So Chihuahua is a city and a valley. This distinction is important when you want to get really, really down into the weeds. But a single origin Chihuahua says that all of the beans come from the geographic area in Venezuela known as Chihuahua. It's not likely to come from a single quote unquote producer in Chihuahua. And we don't even know if it comes from Chihuahua, the village, or Chihuahua, the valley. At that point, it's just we have Chihuahua. So the single origin can be an entire producing country, or it can be a named geographic region. That named geographic region might be a city, but if we were to say it is Caronero, another area of Venezuela, then it could be anywhere in the Caronero region. If I'm doing Sur del Lago, Sur del Lago is near Lake Maracaibo, but it's a very, very different definition of what an origin is. And of course, none of these things talk about what the genetics of the cocoa are, right? It's just talking about a physical region. So if I have a 100% or a Venezuelan single origin anywhere in Venezuela, if I got 100% Chuao single origin, it would be in Chuao, maybe Chuao Village, maybe Chuao Valley. I could have it from Caronero or Barlovento, which is in the state of Miranda. You get the idea. It could be a Piaroa, which is another region. We can work with those ideas. There is also the notion that it could come from a single cooperative, right? So this would be a group of farmers, or I might have a single farmer, or I could have a single estate. So, for example, in Ecuador, Hacienda Victoria is a single estate, and it's a hired labor estate. So there's a bunch of farmers associated with it. I could go to someplace else in Ecuador. I was up in Puerto Quito in 2022, and so I could get beans from, for example, Chacao, and chocolate from Chacao, and it would be a single producer of the beans and the chocolate. Right? So this notion that single origin means single producer, when we don't define what producer is, means that this whole idea about single producer is imprecise, right? And we need to be careful. So what is a producer is not defined, and in my opinion, it should be defined.
So really, like wine, reflects the climate, the growing conditions. It's not like an industrial chocolate where they're trying to make the same thing over and over again with the same flavor. And
Okay, so this is where I want to go back and make the connection to an industrial producer like Valrhona, right? So Valrhona is an industrial producer. If I am using any Valrhona chocolate in a manufacturing process, what I am doing is, so for example, a large scale enrobing line or a similar operation, what I am doing is I am relying on Valrhona to produce a chocolate that is exactly the same flavor, has exactly the same pH, and it's exactly the same rheology from batch to batch to batch. So I know that I can go and buy, quote unquote, the same chocolate, right, and get exactly the same results. I do not need to change my recipes. And that's Valrhona here. And Valrhona here is fundamentally different from Goodnow Farms, for example. Amadei somewhere in the middle. Certainly Ninth and Larkin is more like Goodnow and Dandelion. Pralou and Bonat or somewhere closer to Goodnow Farms than they are Amadei, right? So there is this continuum here. But what we've done is we sort of come to the fundamental definition, in my opinion, between an industrial chocolate maker and a specialty chocolate maker. Now, an industrial chocolate maker can make a single origin chocolate. I could go to Barry Callebaut, I could go to Ecam/Agostoni, I could go to Cacao Berry, I could go to Cargill through their Valish line, and I could go to an industrial chocolate maker and get a single origin chocolate. And if I'm buying a single origin chocolate from an industrial chocolate maker, Lindt is another company on that list, right? The expectation is that the chocolate is going to taste the same, right, all the time. And so the chocolate maker, the definition of chocolate maker in this or industrial chocolate maker in this particular case, is that you start off with the end goal in mind. So no matter what the inherent flavor expression or the potential flavor expression in the beans might be in any given harvest, right? The goal is to end up at the same place every single time, right? Not just from a flavor perspective, but from technical workability perspectives. Whereas the definition of a craft chocolate maker is what they're doing is they're looking at the beans, and what they're trying to do is maximize the flavor expression for any given batch of beans. And so if they get a set of beans, so here we are, we have an almendra blanca, which is a white bean from Mexico. I don't know on the label if it says where in Mexico these are come, but giving Monica and Tom the benefit of the doubt, it will say where they come from. If they were to get something from the 2020 harvest as opposed to the 2021 harvest, the chocolates would be slightly different. And I, as a connoisseur of chocolate, would expect the chocolates to be very different. So an industrial chocolate maker starts off with the end goal in mind, which is something I think Jack got correct. But he's conflating the idea that single origin chocolates are not industrial chocolates. And that is belied by the fact that he has an industrial maker, at least one. And I would throw Amade into that category as well for many of their chocolates. You can both be an industrial chocolate maker for some chocolate and a more craft-oriented chocolate maker. So, for example, the Porcelana, which is probably a very, very limited edition, right, probably has some varietal characteristics which change from harvest to harvest to harvest, batch to batch to batch. And that's very, very different from a true industrial chocolate maker where they're looking for consistency time over time over time. So just a quick understanding of that there.
What a single origin chocolate means, it comes from a single producer. So really, like wine, reflects the climate, the growing conditions. It's not like an industrial chocolate where they're trying to make the same thing over and over again with the same flavor. And what a single origin chocolate.
Okay, so just a quick note. This definition of single origin chocolate, so the definition of single origin chocolate is about the origin of the cocoa beans. What producing country, what region. I suppose you could have a single origin Caribbean, right, where all of the beans came from countries that bordered the Caribbean. So that's perhaps a single origin as well. But the single origin has nothing to do with the type of chocolate maker you are. It has nothing to do with the intent. And what I want to do when I suggest that craft chocolate is different from industrial chocolate is to focus on the intent of the maker. Industrial makers are looking for consistency and repeatability. Craft chocolate makers often don't care about consistency and repeatability. Their goal is to make the tastiest chocolate they can from the beans they have in hand. And often every new batch is a new opportunity for creative expression. So they're fundamentally different in intent. We're not talking about the kind of equipment that's being used. We're not talking about the scale of production. Those things don't matter. It's all about intent. I think that's a really, really important distinction. And I think it's also a way to get to, right, people who, I don't really understand what's going on. You can say, well, here are the differences between an industrial chocolate maker and a craft chocolate maker. And here's what the craft chocolate maker is trying to do when it comes to their beans. And I don't, it's like I'm not using artisan because what is the difference between craft and artisan? What does bean to bar really mean? I mean, just if I'm a big industrial chocolate maker and I start with beans and I end with bars, I'm a bean to bar chocolate maker. If I'm a small scale craft chocolate maker, bean to bar is not the differentiating descriptor that it was back in 1996 and 1997 when Scharfenberger chocolate maker coined the term. So. Single origin chocolate. Now, there's a really interesting other question here, which is not addressed at all in this ATK episode. And that is cocoa butter, right? If I am adding cocoa butter to a recipe and the cocoa butter comes from another country, so I'm making a single origin cocoa bean chocolate with beans from Tanzania, cocoa cameli, for example. All right. But I'm using cocoa butter, an undeodorized cocoa butter from Ecuador. Is that a single origin chocolate? Really? Right. So, some people side differently with that. I mean, we can take it to an extreme. We could say, well, the sugar needs to come from the same producing country. If there's vanilla, it needs to come from the same country as the cocoa beans. I am less, I'm fairly agnostic about the cocoa butter question. However, I think that if you are claiming to be a single origin chocolate and the cocoa beans from one country and the cocoa butter comes from a different country, then declaring those differences, I think they should be on the label. Just, as long as you're open and transparent about it, I think that's okay. But it is something that needs to be grappled with. Anyway, so that's it. So let's go to the next clip.
Right, and they're also doing a better job of paying the labor and really making a commitment to represent these local communities and their chocolates.
So they don't have vintages yet.
Oh no, they do have vintages.
Oh, they do have vintages. Oh, interesting. So it is.
So this clip covers like two different topics. So the first one, which is if I am an industrial chocolate maker, I am Barry Callebaut, I am Cargill, I am Lindt, I am Cacao Berry, which is owned by Barry Callebaut, then this notion that single origin chocolate makers, so producers of single origin chocolates, care about contributing back to the communities that they purchase their cocoa beans from, that they're committed to actually paying higher wages, that they're committed to actually delivering these things, is not necessarily true, right? And we need, again, to be able to differentiate between what single origin is and all these other attributes of single origin, which are actually, which should be attributed to other parts of it. So single origin industrial, single origin craft. I mean, so that would be a way to differentiate this. But it is not necessarily true that all big industrial chocolate makers that are making single origin chocolates have the same level of commitment to transparency and giving back to communities that smaller chocolate makers might. So really, really important distinction here. And again, it's a difference that makes a difference. What Jack and the ATK team here are doing, in my opinion, is that they are promoting this concept that in a big industrial chocolate maker, and keep in mind that Valrhona, which owns La Maison du Chocolat, is in turn owned by a company called Groupe Savencia. It used to be called the Bon Grain Group, and Groupe Savencia is a multinational company that has, in my opinion, some questionable business practices in many, many areas. And so thinking that Valrhona as a company in all of its businesses, including its corporate parent, is concerned about these issues, not necessarily the case. And so we need to let people know that, yeah, the label might say, might have a single producing country or an origin on the bar, but that doesn't mean the maker is committed to all of these things just because it says single origin.
It is really like wine.
It is exactly like wine.
It's not exactly like wine. There are aspects of it which are like wine, but single origin chocolate is not the same thing as single origin wine. Just not.
Right, and they're also doing a better job of paying the labor and really making a commitment to represent these local communities and their chocolates.
So they don't have vintage.
So another thing that you need to do here is that you need to understand here is that none of the chocolates which are being shown here are actually being produced in the place where the beans were grown. So single origin chocolate makers, the ones that are part of here, are not representing the communities and their chocolates. They're representing the communities and their cocoa beans. And that's a very, very different thing entirely. All right. And it is also true.
Oh, no, they do have vintages.
Oh, they do have vintages.
It is also true that some single origin chocolates, some craft chocolates are vintaged. Valrhona has produced a vintage chocolate. I believe that of the chocolates that are on the list, I think that Dandelion might be the only one that shows the harvest on the front of the label. So we need to do it, but just because it is a single origin chocolate does not mean that there is necessarily a quote unquote vintage / harvest date on the label. So really, really important thing to understand. You just, it's a subtle thing, right? But I think that it's a really, really important thing to understand. Again, this concept of single origin, which is just where the beans come from, right? And it's on the label, is being conflated with lots of other attributes, right? And so we're loading very, very heavily all these other things on top of single origin that, in my opinion, anyway, don't belong there. And I think that the more attributes that you layer on top of a simple concept, the harder it is to buy into this overloaded idea of what single origin means. And it's really easy. Somebody might go in and say, "Oh, here's a single origin chocolate, but I don't see a vintage date on it. What does that mean?" Right? Really crucial to start thinking about it. Before we head off, let's do a quick reset. You're watching Pod Safe Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon, your host and moderator. I'm also the creator and publisher of TheChocolateLife.com. Today, we're talking about single origin chocolate. This episode is sponsored by the members of The Chocolate Life. If you're not a member, go to TheChocolateLife.com, click the join button. There's always a free tier. If you're watching today, let me know where in the world you're watching from. I don't need to know whether it's LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook. That I will see. But if you're connecting from the United States, or you're connecting from a foreign country, let me know. I'll get the shout out up on screen. If you've got a question or a comment, let me know. And I will go and address those comments and questions during the course of the live stream. All right, next clip.
Okay, why did you bring warm water? So that's why we're in mugs. So we found that the warm water really just helps open up your taste buds so you can really appreciate the nuances, and they're really quite different from each other. Okay.
This is a really great technique, all right, because when you are evaluating the flavor of a chocolate, the flavor release of the chocolate is moderated by how the cocoa butter melts, right? So if your mouth is cold, right, because, I've just had a cold drink, something out of the refrigerator, or the chocolate is cold because it's been sitting in a cold place, 65 degrees Fahrenheit, about 18 degrees centigrade or lower, your mouth needs to generate a lot more heat to start melting the cocoa butter. And the flavor will be released, the aromas in the nose and the flavors on the tongue will be released depending on how the fat, in large part, depending on how the fat melts. So if you start with a warm mouth, so you're drinking water, which is about 100 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe 110. So you're looking at 35, 38 degrees centigrade, something like that. What will happen is that your mouth will be warm. And when you put the chocolate in your mouth, it will melt differently. Now, it's really an interesting exercise to say, does the chocolate taste the same or different depending upon how cold the chocolate is and how cold my mouth is? And so you might find that there are different expressions of the same chocolate based on the temperature at which it's eaten, right? Which is the chocolate itself, the ambient environment, and the temperature of your mouth. So it's a great technique to help you, especially early on. It will have a much faster release of the chemicals. It might have a more complete release of the aroma and flavor chemicals. And so you'll be able to catch perhaps more subtle nuances and be able to see the differences that they're talking about, that Jack is talking about. It's probably, in my opinion, the single best bit of advice that is given during the course of this episode. So if you're doing a tasting, to have warm water on hand, and to use that warm water tepid, so you can sense that it is warm on your mouth in order to be able to get the chocolate to melt a little more quickly. Next to last clip for today, for this episode.
I will say the cacao content for the 3 samples I put on the table is fairly close.
Mm-hmm.
And some manufacturers, they're adding extra cocoa butter so that you get more creaminess. In fact, 2 of the samples that you're tasting have extra cocoa butter for extra richness. Because one of the things, as you guys know, when you make a low sugar chocolate, you can.
Okay, so there is a really interesting conflation here about the higher the cocoa content, the lower the sugar, and it is the sugar that actually contributes to this lack of creaminess. So anybody who has spent any time eating 2-ingredient chocolate, so just cocoa beans and sugar, will know that in general they are crunchier, they're crisper than a conventional than a conventional 3-ingredient chocolate with cocoa beans, cocoa butter, and sugar, not necessarily in that order, right? But what happens is that the fat content is a part of the cocoa content, and Jack doesn't mention that the cocoa content includes any added cocoa butter. But there's this notion that it is the sugar that is adding to the crunchiness. As a matter of fact, it is the ratio of non-fat cocoa solids, the cocoa powder, to the cocoa butter that has got more of an impact. And so what we're doing when we add cocoa butter, we're not changing the ratio of sugar, which is the mistake that he makes. So if I have a 75% cocoa content chocolate, it's 25% sugar, right? But because cocoa butter is counted in the total cocoa content, right? If I'm starting off with a bean, which is relatively low fat, 47% cocoa, for example, right? And that 47% fat content cocoa mass, the only other ingredient is sugar, then I'm going to have a crunchier chocolate, something which is less creamy in the mouth. I can have a 75% cocoa content bar. I'm using that same 47% cocoa mass, but I'm added cocoa butter. The ratio of cocoa to sugar doesn't change, right? And that's the fundamental mistake that is being overlooked here. That it is not that there is a relationship between the cocoa butter and the cocoa content, which needs to be thought of, not just the ratio of cocoa to sugar. And it's also true that it's more important what the cocoa content of the bean is to begin with. I could have that same 75% chocolate made cocoa content chocolate, but made with a bean that has 53% fat. And it would have a very, very different mouthfeel than the chocolate made with 47% fat. So really, really, again, it's a tiny detail, but it's one that they get wrong, right? That they don't understand what the relationship is, how the math works. And they're getting they're giving somebody an incorrect evaluation of what it is that's going on in terms of the physics and the chemistry and the mouthfeel. As they will say over and over and over in ATK episodes, fat is flavor. And a single origin chocolate maker who is making a 2-ingredient chocolate will say that any added cocoa butter, right, especially cocoa butter that comes from a different country. So I'm doing a single origin Mexican, and what I'm doing is adding cocoa butter from Indonesia, right? Especially if it's a deodorized cocoa butter, what's going to happen is you're going to dilute the flavor of the chocolate. Technically, that may be true. However, a higher fat chocolate is going to deliver the flavor that's in the bar more easily. It's not going to require as much work on the part of your mouth in order to be able to melt things and get things going. So, and as a matter of fact, the average chocolate consumer wants to consume chocolate, not cocoa mass with some sugar in it. And so there are some conventions about doing it. And the average consumer, in a blind taste test, probably wouldn't be able to tell unless the amount of cocoa butter added was incredibly high. Now, if I'm Bonnat, so if you go to the Salon du Chocolat in Paris for many, many years, you'd find that Bonnat and Pralou were right across the aisle from each other. And they could be getting the same beans, so the beans from the same place in Madagascar. They're both making 75% chocolates with them, but they're going to have something which is completely different. So we need to understand the particular aesthetic of the chocolate maker. They have a creative viewpoint. They're making their chocolate from that viewpoint. And so it's not quite the same that all lower sugar chocolates, whatever that means, will have a crunchier, crispier mouthfeel, which is related to the melt more than anything else. So really, really important, in my opinion, to get this right. Do a quick shout out. We got a couple of comments here from Nettie Atkinson. Nettie, I think Goo Clay. Goo, I'm not sure exactly what that's all about. But yeah, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're connecting from. It's good to hear from you today. From Mark and Yuri at Blue Spruce Chocolate, Kittredge, Colorado. Warm water, great idea, easy to provide. A crime that cocoa butter content isn't listed. It's yeah, no, it is not required in the United States under the Code of Federal Regulations to actually state the cocoa mass content separately from the cocoa butter content. And I don't think it's a part of UK regulations or the Codex Alimentarius, for which is the body of law which is used by much of the world outside the United States. Often what you'll have to do is you'll have to say minimum 33% cocoa solids. But in this particular case, we have the non-fat solids. And because cocoa butter is a saturated fat and it is solid at room temperature, turns out the cocoa butter is also a cocoa solid. We need to differentiate between the non-fat solids and the solids. But yeah, I mean, but in fact, what would happen is that, cocoa butter content, and, Mark, you probably know this from your own work making chocolate, is that cocoa butter content can change slightly from harvest to harvest, right? So the natural cocoa. So you might one year, one harvest it might be 50%, and the next year it might be 49%. And so the amount of added cocoa butter that you're adding might change. And so this might be because of labeling, right? If I had to redo my labels every time I changed the percentage of cocoa butter that I had to add to the recipe to get to something, it would get expensive very, very quickly. And so that might be one reason why it's not being done. Right? But let's go back and let's get back.
Can lose some of that creaminess, right? Because
Yeah.
there's so much chocolate
right.
in there.
Right.
I will say the cacao
So
content.
it's, again, a little thing, but it's not because there's so much chocolate in there, right? It's higher cacao content. And again, what they're doing is they're making the mistake here. They're reiterating the mistake they made early. It's not the cacao content that is the issue here. It is the fat content of the cocoa mass, right? The fat content of the cocoa mass will determine, along with the specific creative intent of the chocolate maker, whether to add extra cocoa butter or not, right? My personal opinion when it comes down to this is you should add enough cocoa butter, just enough cocoa butter, at least to make your life easy, right? If you're having problem depositing the chocolate, right, then add a little cocoa butter to make it easier to temper properly and to deposit it, right? You're just making your life easier. It turns out cocoa butter is more expensive than lecithin, so I can understand why people don't want to use lecithin. There are issues related to allergens and other things like that, so you may not want to use soy lecithin, for example. But if you're having problem tempering a 2-ingredient chocolate, and they're having problem depositing that 2-ingredient chocolate because it is so thick, just make your life easy. Add enough cocoa butter, right? You can keep the same cocoa content overall. Just add enough cocoa butter to make your life easy. That's a bit of consulting advice that I give to every single one of my consulting clients. Do that. And the last.
Every time Bridget says
Clip of the
flavor, I'm
day.
like, yeah, I taste that in all of them.
Hazelnut.
Yeah.
Yeah,
B.
hazelnut.
Mhm.
B.
So if I asked you to pick a favorite, or do you feel like that's just so hard here?
It's not hard. I like B.
Okay.
I like B. There's something too fruity about C for me. I don't love citrusy. It's not my thing. It's delicious, but it's not for me. B is my thing. It's chocolate, a little nutty. A is delicious too.
Yeah, I'm going to go between B and A. I think if I had to choose one, I think I like A a little bit more because just some of the undertones seems a little bit brighter.
Every time Bridget says,
Okay. One of the things that I like about the discussion around flavors is they talk more generally. So Jack will talk about chocolatey and fudgy, and they'll go to ganache, or they'll talk about citrusy, right? When they get very specific, they didn't go to nuts; they went straight to hazelnuts. And Jack talks about earthiness, and that one of the chocolates tasted like shiitake mushrooms. I mean, this is not the first place to go. Anybody who's, if you followed me for any length of time, you know that I am really, really a fan of starting with a more general. So this is fruity, and then go from fruity to what kind of fruit, or this is nutty, go to what kind of nuts. If this is, so you could go fruit, is it red fruit? Is it dried fruit? There are lots of ways you can go. Is it a tropical fruit? There are lots of ways you can go, but to go directly to shiitake mushrooms from Oh, it tastes earthy. The earthiness is that like actually dirt or is it like mushrooms? Oh yeah, it's more like mushrooms. And like, I don't know that on a blind taste test I could tell you what a shiitake mushroom tastes like compared with a matsutake mushroom, for example. And to go straight to shiitake mushrooms in a chocolate requires a lot of experience to understand. So I don't want to go there. So one of the things I like about the discussion between Bridget and Julia here is they're for the most part being very general in the way they describe it and very general in the way they describe their preferences. So of the 14 samples that the tasting panel went through, the three that were presented were A, from Francois Parlou, it's a 75% Ghana. And this is where the sort of chocolatey, fudgy ganache thing came through, that Ghana represents the flavor profile that we think of as chocolate. It is the reference profile origin for chocolatey flavor. Pralou adds cocoa butter. So 75% means going to be added cocoa butter here. Is going to include added cocoa butter. Ninth and Larkin is Fiji. I haven't tasted this particular bar, so I can't talk about what I feel about this bar compared with what it is that Bridget and Julie have to say. But what I also point out is this is the one that's got added cocoa butter. I know that just because I know that the philosophy of Dandelion is to not add cocoa butter. So this 70% India, which is the only one that appears to be vintaged, so it's the 2019 harvest, gives clues about what we can expect. All right, you need to look at the ingredient label on the back to figure out, oh, am I adding cocoa butter or not? Am I using a white sugar? Right, so a refined sugar, whether from cane or from beets, or I'm adding an unrefined sort of natural sugar. A natural sugar, so an unrefined sugar will have, it's not pure white, and the difference between white and brown filtered out is that there will be flavor compounds in the sugar, which will affect the flavor of the chocolate as well. And that's a completely other discussion, which is another video. And I think the total video here is it's 5, maybe 7 minutes, but 2 minutes of commercials at the end of it. I got clips out of here that are that cover I think what are the main points of the video. But I'm really, really happy that what they did is they chose 3 different origins, Ghana, Fiji, and India. We got, a fairly narrow range of cocoa content, 70% to 75%, without actually indicating which one of the makers added cocoa butter, which I think is important. And to understand, go back and watch, what it is
As
that
a
people
flavor,
like.
I'm like, yeah, I taste that in all of them.
Hazelnut.
Yeah.
Yeah,
B.
hazelnut.
Mhm.
B.
So if I asked you to pick a favorite, or do you feel like that's just so hard here?
It's not hard. I like B.
Okay.
I like B. There's something too fruity about C for me. I don't love citrusy. It's not my thing. It's delicious, but it's not for me. B is my thing. It's chocolate, a little nutty. A is delicious too.
Yeah, I'm going to go between B and A. I think if I had to choose one, I think I like A a little bit more because
So this is, I think, another really important aspect of the discussion here, which is it's important to understand what you like, right? I think that in the age of social media, especially rating and review sites, there's so for example, if you go to a restaurant and it's like 5 stars on, and you have to go try this because it is the best thing in existence. You go to this menu and you go there and you go, I'm not convinced, right? It doesn't do it for me. There's often a tendency to say, well, what's wrong with my palate? Everybody else loves it. I'm not. I don't like it, right? And that's really, really important. It's what it says is that whatever the chef is doing, maybe it was an off night, the chef's not in, the chef de cuisine is in, a sous chef is, somebody. Maybe it's just kitchens do have off nights, right? And so maybe that's what it is. You don't know. You'd have to go back a couple of times in order to be able to figure it out. But it's okay not to like something when everybody else likes it. So one of my goals as a critic, and one of the things I want to point out here, is that it's really, really important to have confidence in your sense of taste, right? Do not give up ownership of what you like to someone else's review and impression of the chocolate. If you like it, know why you like it. What is it about it? Oh, I don't like, right, the C, in this particular case, the dandelion India, because it is too citrusy, fruity. Okay, great. You tend to like things that are more chocolatey. There's nothing wrong with that. It's what you like. Don't let anybody tell you, right, that one brand of chocolate has to be better than any other brand of chocolate because they're not adding cocoa butter, right? It's a creative decision. You may or may not like it, but it's really, really important. I mean, this is the number one thing that's, sort of a change in my entire thinking about how to rate and review chocolate over the course of the last 30 years is to say, my goal is not to tell you that this is better than this is better. Objectively, because of my experience, I may know that. But in the end, you're the one who's going to eat it. And so it's really important is that you like it, right? If I don't like it, hey, I don't have to eat it, right? But really, really understand what it is you like about what you like and be able to articulate it just really, really simply and really easily. If you like white chocolate, that's great. There are some absolutely wonderful white chocolates out there in the world, right? But people might say, well, you can't be a real chocolate lover because you like white chocolate. And no, that's not the case, right? But understanding what it is about it that you like or a particular brand compared with something else is going to be really, really interesting here. And you need to have that baseline because it makes it easier to evaluate new chocolates. Oh, this chocolate is familiar. It has characteristics of chocolate that I already know I like. Yum, right? Oh, this chocolate tastes like chocolates I already know I don't like. And, what are those things? So I think that for me, right, the best part of this entire video and where it gets to the individual subjective aspects of rating chocolate is this end section here. I mean, it's really, really cool, really, really important that we do that and that you take hold of that, right? That you have the experience to understand what you like and why you like it and be able to articulate those things. So I want to do a quick, this is a longer comment, so I haven't read it before I do it. So hello to Teresa. One of the things I appreciate about me, right? Well, thank you very much. It's a lot of what I do is help dispel misinformation and misunderstanding. And what is said, thought, and understood about cocoa chocolate, as well as holding folks accountable. I think it's part of what confuses and distracts consumers from understanding craft chocolate. And then thank you for that. Teresa, thank you very much. There's anybody who has followed my work for any length of time will know that I am very focused on understanding how words get used, right? And it's important that we come to consensus communications about what we mean. So if we as a community of craft chocolate makers, for example, right, are confused about what it means to be bean to bar, no wonder consumers are confused, right? And if we can't communicate about these ideas in a consistent fashion, then the market is got another impediment to growth. And so a lot of my thinking is around how words get used. The words we use affect our beliefs, beliefs inform our actions, and our actions have consequences. And so, that's why I spend a lot of time thinking about this, especially from the perspective of makers, right? So again, the individual consumer can think about the chocolate in any way they want when it comes to their taste preferences, what they like and don't like. For example, I'm a big texture guy. I'm not likely to prefer a lot of 2-ingredient chocolates made from beans with lower fat contents because I just don't like the texture of them. It's just, I prefer something, right, which has a higher fat content. And a lot of that is my introduction to single origin chocolate in 1994 was Bonat, right? And there is, a very, very definite style when it comes to Bonat chocolate. And that informs the way I think about it. And, you're different, your background and your approach may be different, right? And it's really, really important. It's really, really, really important to understand it. So what I want to do before I close today is...
If you're over 50, you don't want to use traditional makeup. As we age, our skin tends to lose moisture.
I actually want to watch the video, but there is a link to the full video in the page on the Chocolate Life. But what I wanted to do here was actually go into the comments. So the video is, when was it published? 11 days ago. It's got 65,000 views. I don't know how this stacks up against other ATK videos. If it's high or low, I didn't pay attention. It's got 100 some odd comments. What's really interesting to me here is that the single topic that is most brought up is, well, they didn't talk about heavy metals in this chocolate, in this video. Yeah, and you'll go through, and of this 112 comments, I think 5 are mine. Somebody talked about Ruby, and so I was dispelling misinformation about Ruby. But I think that one of the things that would be very, very interesting, and this is left as an exercise for you, the viewer here, is to go take a look at the comments, right? And if you're a maker, right, what this will help you understand, right, is what perhaps people who are not cognoscenti, people who are not connoisseurs of single origin chocolate, craft chocolate, specialty chocolate, what they took away from watching the video, right? And what that will do is it will help, number one, if somebody comes in and says, oh, you're running a retail shop. Oh, I saw this ATK video about single origin chocolates, right? And blah, 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 X, Y, and Z. You'll be able to respond to them, right? And, I'm sure, Mark, if you've got retail customers who are walking into the shop in Kittredge, many of them, I'm guessing, will spend some time at least mentioning social media and videos that they've watched, right? And they'll have questions that they're asking you. And one of the things to do is to go and look at these videos, at the comments, to this video, and try to understand what it is that people took away from the video. It's really, really fascinating. For me, of the 112 comments, again, I think the topic which is brought up most often is about heavy metals. And what it says is, and Teresa, to your point, Consumer Reports, in my opinion, was irresponsibly fear-mongering when they published both of their reports around heavy metals in chocolate. Why? I don't know, but I think that we have an emotional attachment to chocolate and an emotional attachment to babies, and therefore baby food, right? And those emotional attachments are very different from spinach. And so there's going to be no expose on heavy metals contamination of leafy greens, right? We're going to talk about chocolate and baby food, right? Because it will get more headlines. And it doesn't really matter that, there's not one recorded instance of anybody going to hospital as a result of heavy metals toxicity, which can be correlated to the consumption of cocoa. Doesn't exist. It doesn't matter that the Prop 65 levels, which are set for maximum daily limits, right, have to do with take the no observable effect limit and then divide by 1,000. I mean, there's no understanding. That was not a part of the discussion, right? But it's really, really important to understand, right, that this is what people are taking away from this video, right? That despite everything they're talking about, vintages and, representing farming communities and all that kind of stuff, what they took away is why no discussion of heavy metals. And, right, really, really important to understand. And as Teresa, as you pointed out, there are probably more heavy metals in our drinking water. Yeah, it turns out that the two most likely sources for environmental contamination when it comes to heavy metals, lead specifically in the United States, paint and drinking water, right? Those are the two highest sources of environmental exposure. And cocoa and chocolate is like 8 or 9 out of 10, right? With leafy vegetables and legumes and grains being much, much higher on the list. So we do need to understand where things are going. Now, in a video, which is talking about single origin chocolate, discussing heavy metals would have taken this short 7-minute video where they're really focused on certain aspects of what it means to be single origin, right? And then blown it up into an hour video with a lot of science. And while there is a lot of science in recipe videos, why am I doing things the way I am doing them? There's never any science in these tasting videos. So it wouldn't make sense in terms of the context of what is going on. And I'm surprised that ATK viewers are doing it. I also think that this title is just wrong. The best single origin chocolate bars, right? Right. Anybody who took a look, right, at the bars that are here, right, would say, would have tasted them, would have different personal preferences. So talking about these 14 bars, who selected the 14 or the bars from the 14 different producers? I would like to know the ones that didn't make it onto this list, because we don't have 14 different regions, right? We only have 3 manufacturing countries, the United States, Italy, and France involved. Why not Spain? It's like no Belgium, no Switzerland. I mean, that's interesting right there, right? There are single origin chocolates made lots of places. Were these just easy to get to the people here and who run this? So there's a lot here which is missing in terms of understanding. But I think that if, apart from everything else that we're talking about, is that what the tasting panel here has done and what ATK has done is said that the bars which we can view here and the 3 bars at the end are the best single origin chocolates. And I think that does a disservice to the topic, and it does a disservice to everybody who is watching this video. And now I hope, at the end of an hour, and it's just blown through. I didn't think I would get anywhere close to the end of this. What I'm hoping that you'll do is that, number one, is that you will go and watch the full-length video more critically. Don't watch the clips. Go and click and watch the full-length video, right, from beginning to end, right, and get the context of the entire video. And then, if necessary, go back and watch the individual clips that I've put out. You could say, did I do a good job of clipping it? Did a bad job of clipping it? Did I miss something? The answer to the question is, one of the reasons why I did is because I've gotten through to the end of this and YouTube hasn't said copyright, I'm going to close you down, right? Which is something that I wanted to do. I wanted to avoid that. Happened once with John Oliver and an HBO video this week tonight, and I want to make sure that I avoided it, right? But go through and look at it yourself. And now, here's the great thing. Go to a store. If you're in Pittsburgh, you can go to Mon Ami. I don't know that Amy has all of these. You might go to Bar and Cocoa and get all of these. You might go to Caputo's and get all of these. Maybe you're in San Francisco, Chocolate Covered. Jack is a great source, and it's a lot of fun to go into the store. I mean, but go and consume these bars a little bit more mindfully, with a little bit better understanding of what single origin means, right? Which is very limited in scope. All single origin means, this is it, is that where the beans come from are listed on the label. That's it. It doesn't tell you, it could tell you if the origin is an entire country. It could tell you if it's a geographic region within a country. It could tell you if it's in a state, or it could tell you if it's a single farm, right? But those are delineations within the larger concept of single origin. Everything else that they talk about here, right, in terms of social justice, paying back to farmers, communities, all of these other things have nothing to do with the concept of single origin. Nothing to do with the concept of single origin. And as I said, every time we try to take a simple concept like single origin and then conflate lots of other ideas on top of it, we make the whole thing much more complicated to understand. I, for one, so we talked about industrial chocolate, but we didn't balance industrial chocolate with craft chocolate. And so there's this, single origin chocolate versus industrial. That's not a dichotomy. It's a false dichotomy. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't work. So it's a really, really important. It's really, really important that you go through here, even with a source. And I would say, especially with a source like ATK, which is like known for producing, incredibly accurate and technically correct stuff, and it has a reputation for doing it. You still need to go and look at what they're saying and take what they're saying skeptically, right? You need to say, I don't know that these are deliberate mistakes. They might come from a much more fundamental misunderstanding. I mean, I had an opportunity to meet Chris Kimball in Vermont many, many years ago. So Chris is the founder of this whole enterprise. And we did, manage to spend 2 minutes talking about chocolate because I disagreed with one of the positions that Cooks Illustrated took on their chocolate. But now that you've gone to this episode, one of the things I will do is I will do the link to the cocoa powder episode. There's a chocolate chip episode. There may be some other episodes talking about chocolate and ATK. I'll put bookmark cards to those other episodes. And so you will be able to watch them and get an idea of how to view these. So if anything, it's like, oh, I know how to view these things more skeptically, which I think is really important tool to understand what's going on with these videos. You can't trust everything you see and read on the internet, right? Right. And I don't necessarily know that you should trust me 100% either, right? Take what it is that I have to say skeptically, and then develop your own understanding through your own background and research, right? And have opinions which you can articulate. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give you a set of tools that you can use to be a better consumer of information. And I hope that today's episode, deconstructing this episode, this video from America's Test Kitchen around the best single origin chocolates, will give you some tools, some better tools that you can use to be able to decode the claims that are being made about the chocolates that you love. And with that, thank you very much, everyone, for joining me. I want to thank everybody who's watched through to the end. I want to thank everybody who's commented. Please, if you're on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. It's free. Like this video. Give it a thumbs up if you can. Also, click on the notification bell and subscribe so that you get updated for future episodes of Pod Save Chocolate. To go to TheChocolateLife.com. Join. There's always a free membership level. You will get the member newsletter every month at a very minimum, and be invited to join the monthly member AMA call, which is this coming Sunday at 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. It'll last about 90 minutes. The link to join the call is in the February member newsletter, and you can't read the link unless you are a member and you're logged in. So go do all of those things. And remember, right, that if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. And for me, this kind of education and understanding it and trying to be a communicator and articulate these things, for me, is part of the definition of fun. So I had a great time today. I hope you guys all had a great time today. And I look forward to meeting you in a future episode of Pod Save Chocolate. Ciao, everyone.